So let's go over the new purchase agreement. I'm going to share my screen and we are going to take a look at the new purchase agreement. So as of yesterday, this is the only purchase agreement that will now be available in zip forms. As a quick side note, I wanted to remind you that through the Virginia Association of Realtors and your membership through them, you have a free account with SkySlope, and I will ask Jennifer to type that into the chat window. You can go to VAR's, the Virginia Association of Realtors website, to link over to SkySlope, and you're going to have a free annual membership with SkySlope, which is a zip forms competitor. So it is another forms provider. So the RVAR forms are over there now, and it should also contain the new purchase agreement. And the benefit of using that, you still have zip forms, but the benefit of transitioning over to SkySlope and using your forms over in SkySlope is that your SkySlope account comes with a free annual membership to DigiSign, which is an electronic signature software program. So you will no longer have to purchase an e-signature software program if you decide to use SkySlope. Eventually, I assume there will be a link from the MLS, the same way it is for zip forms now. But I have used the SkySlope account a couple of times now. I found it very easy to use. Did not have some of the glitches that my current zip forms has. But if you want to check it out, I would recommend you do that before you are against the clock trying to get an offer submitted, which is, of course, you know how I did it. Still worked fine. I was very pleased with it. There was a glitch a couple of weekends ago where the purchase agreement was not responding in zip forms. So I had to go over and use it in SkySlope, and I was very, very pleased with the user interface over there. So if you want more information on that, just reach out to Jennifer at the office or me, and we will get you set up. So let's start digging in on the purchase agreement. The first thing I want you guys to know is that the bulk of this purchase agreement is the same as it was. They've tidied up and done a few housekeeping items, but primarily the purpose of this new version is to change the inspection process to be more flexible with the style of market we are in. So if we are in a buyer's market, like we have been in previous years, then this contract will still be able to function properly. But if we're in a seller's market, like we've been in for the last year and a half, 2 years, this should still be able to function. Unlike our current purchase agreement, where I have spent a lot of time in the last year working with other brokers to help navigate as is, but with inspection contracts. We've been trying to use our contract as of yesterday or day before yesterday, been trying to use that contract to be as is with inspections, and it just doesn't want to work right. It has a lot of conflicting language in it. So this one is now going to have 2 separate options for the inspection process. One is very similar to the one we have now, and the other is similar to how it is done if you've ever done a foreclosure. So if you've ever done a foreclosure, the buyer has 10 business days to conduct any and all inspections. At the conclusion of that time, the buyer may terminate. So we're going to have an option like that available in this purchase agreement. Now, before you get upset for the seller and say, well, if I'm a listing agent, I don't want to give them an easy out, you won't have to. The seller doesn't have to agree to make that clause part of the contract. But in a market where the buyers can pick and choose what they want to buy, and the sellers are really trying to entice a buyer, the seller may opt to agree to that type of transaction. A seller who has maybe never lived in the home, an estate sale, they may love that option. Maybe they don't want to learn any material defects that are in the property or receive any reports. So instead, they may say, no, we're going to go with this track over here, and the buyer can have a look for 10 business days and then terminate or stay in. But at that point, you're moving on as is. So that is going to be an available option now. Now, let's just start with page 1 here. You'll see that under addenda, the inspection addendum is no longer a checkbox there. We will no longer be having an inspection addendum. All of the inspection language has been moved back onto the body of the purchase agreement. This was, in my mind, the biggest conflicting language about as is with inspections, where we had clause 15 and you had to indicate, is this contract or is this contract not contingent upon inspections? If you said it is contingent upon inspections, it compelled you to use the inspection addendum, which had all sorts of language about turning in reports and asking for repairs. And that in the last year and a half is not what we've been trying to do. We've been trying to do, yes, we want inspections, but we know we're buying it as is. So now the inspection addendum no longer exists, and it is no longer a checkbox on the addenda list. So we're going to keep going down here. Much of this has stayed exactly the same on page 2. Page 3 has stayed very much the same. If they've changed
Ashley,
any.
can I interrupt you for just 1 second? Do you want questions at the end, or do you want questions as they go along?
Because as they go along is fine.
Okay, so Stevie's posted one, and she's asking if they can put in their listings a preference on choice. For instance, she's about to list one that the seller wants to be as is with inspections allowed. Can they add that to their listing?
So I would say absolutely. As it is now in the private remarks, you can say home sold as is, seller will make no repairs. So I think going one step further and saying we would be very agreeable to the purchaser using clause, and I forget what it is now, will and indicate that clause that you're willing to use, which is saying, because I'm about to list one that's an estate sale, and that's been my recommendation. Let's sell it as is, but with inspections. And let me explain to you, attorney, how this new clause works. And I think you'll be pleased to see that it does not compel the buyer to provide us reports. In fact, they may not provide the listing agent reports unless the listing agent asks for them. Because this attorney, this estate sale attorney, does not want to be burdened with any of that information. So I think it would be very acceptable for you to put in the private remarks section, you know, home to be sold in as is condition, seller to make no repairs, seller is agreeable to using clause, whatever it is, it's like 14B or something. I'll tell you what the number is. We'll see it here in a moment. I think that would be a very smart way to identify what you're willing to do. And PJ says, what about pre-home inspection? Still handle as before? Absolutely. So there's always the option for a seller to elect to have a home inspection prior to listing. I love that idea because it means then the seller on their own dime can hire a handyman to repair so many of the tiny little honey-do items that never happened without having to go to the additional expense of hiring a contractor to tighten a toilet to the floor or fix the switch on the shower stall that makes it go from bathtub to shower. Those are little piddly items that when under contract become items contractors have to do or plumbers have to do. So by having a pre-listing home inspection, the seller is able to really knock out a lot of those items to make for a much cleaner path to closing once you're on the market. And so any material defects that are discovered during that, PJ, that you do not remedy become disclosure obligations for the listing agent. Now, they do not become a disclosure obligation for the seller in the state of Virginia unless they are one of the items that the Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act obligates and compels the seller to disclose, like lead-based paint. So for the most part in our area of the state, really, there are very few of those mandatory disclosure obligations that come up in our area. So I think that's an excellent idea. Still think it's an excellent idea. All right, so we're going to go on to page 3 here. Thank you all for the excellent questions. We continue on down through here. Most of this still looks the same. Keep going. And then we're going to get down here to 14. So 14 is now our inspection process. And it says purchasers' obligations under this contract are or are not contingent upon purchaser obtaining one or more inspections of the property, which may include, but is not limited to, meaning this buyer can have any inspection they want. If they want to have an air quality test, they may, because they're saying the purchaser is obtaining one or more inspections of the property, which may include, but is not limited to, inspections for or of the following: foundations, roofs, flooring, HVAC and electrical systems, plumbing, appliances, exterior insulation, drainage, structural issues, well, wood destroying organisms, environmental or radon. All such inspections will be conducted at purchaser's sole cost and expense unless otherwise required by lender, and will be conducted by engineers, inspectors, or contractors who will be licensed in their discipline by the Commonwealth of Virginia. The reason why that little bit of language in the middle says unless the lender won't allow is because for certain government-backed loans like USDA or VA or VHDA, those like VA, they may require the seller to be the one to purchase the termite inspection. So that is why they have that little caveat in there. It goes on to say all inspections will be completed not later than blank business days after full ratification of this contract. Again, my recommendation is 10 business days. That is just my recommendation. If you're not a procrastinator like me, maybe you can get that done in 5 business days. I love that for you. I am not that person. I'm also 49 years old. I will never become that person. So I'm going to put 10 business days. Now the seller has the right to counteroffer that. The seller can come back and say, no, we're going to do 5 business days. Well, that's either acceptable to my buyer or it's not. If I receive this as a listing agent and it says 15 business days, I'm going to counteroffer that. I'm going to say 10 business days is really plenty. Now, there may be an extenuating circumstance. Maybe the buyer, maybe this is a 90-day closing and the buyer lives in California, would like to fly over and be here for the inspection. Great. That's where we talk it out and we figure that out. Okay. So then it goes on to say, and this should seem familiar to you, purchaser will notify seller in writing prior to the inspection deadline, and the inspection deadline will be extended no more than 7 business days to conduct additional inspections. So if the home inspector says, you know what, the HVAC is not functioning properly, you need to have an HVAC specialist come out here, and we're right up against the end of our business days, our inspection deadline, the purchaser is going to notify the seller. This is obviously through their agents in writing. So the buyer's agent is going to send an email to the listing agent. And I have language for this if you would like it. You just ask me for it. And it just says, hey, listing agent, home inspection got completed, and it turns out we're going to need to have an HVAC specialist come out and look and see why the HVAC system is not functioning properly. I am letting you know in this email that we are exercising our option to ask for a 7 business day extension to the inspection time period to allow for that follow-up inspection. Okay. That, in my opinion, would satisfy the need for the purchaser to tell the seller that they are exercising their option to have this extension. And why they're extending it. Because you may not extend it because you just didn't get your home inspection scheduled in time. This is for subsequent inspections. And those subsequent inspections have to have been recommended by the original inspector. So you unfortunately cannot just say, well, I don't think that home inspector knew what they were talking about the HVAC. We're going to go ahead and get an HVAC specialist in during the extension. If you want to have an HVAC person come out during the original inspection timeline, you may. So schedule those home inspections up front, get them done in the first couple of days, because you don't know what the discoveries will be and what sort of rabbit trail that'll send you off on. So I really do try to get those done early. That way we know what we're dealing with. And if we're going to have an HVAC person come out, have a plumber come out, maybe the drains are all draining really slowly, and we're going to want to put a camera down the sewer line. We don't know what's going to come up during that home inspection. So, okay, let's read the last little bit of this. It says, purchaser will be liable. Wait, let me back up just a little bit. So sorry. It'll be extended by 7 business days to conduct such additional inspections. Then it says, if purchaser fails either to conduct the inspections in the time specified or to provide the materials as set out in 14B below by the inspection deadline, or as it may have been extended, the right to conduct such additional inspections will be deemed waived by the purchaser. Okay. So if you don't have your inspections by the time the inspection deadline comes along, the purchaser has waived their right to have them. It also goes on to say that if any damage happens to the property, the purchaser will be responsible for that. So please watch your termite inspectors who like to shove, 8-inch long screwdrivers through boards and lever them upwards and rip the board all to pieces. Just, be at your home inspection. Be at your home inspection and walk around. Be at your termite inspection and walk around. That is what we are paid to do. We are paid to manage this transaction. So that is what we need to be doing. Then it goes on to say the reports for the inspections will be collectively referred to as the inspection reports and each individually as an inspection report. Now, when the Standard Forms Committee was creating this new version, it became apparent that septic is a whole nother thing, because septic could include digging up a distribution box, running cameras all down the distribution lines in the drain field. It could include digging up the tank itself and looking inside the tank to make sure everything is functioning properly, checking the tank lid, all sorts of things that are more invasive than a regular series of home inspections. Okay. So because they identified that this could become a problematic area between the seller and the buyer, they decided that the buyer needs to disclose and the seller needs to agree up front how invasive, basically, of a septic look is this buyer going to want. So what it says is, in the event the property is served by a septic system, purchaser's obligations under this contract are or are not contingent on purchaser obtaining a septic inspection. And if purchaser elects a septic inspection, the following provision will apply. So if there is no septic system, I'm assuming you can ignore this because it says in the event the property is served by a septic system. Well, if my house has public sewer, I'm not going to check either of these boxes. But then I already see a problem coming up if we find out later it is a septic system. I mean, I can already tell this is going to be an area where we're like, but I can understand why they don't want a checkbox saying it is or it is not served by a septic system, because then potentially somebody could claim fraud later if truly we thought it was a septic system and it turns out it's not, or we didn't think it was a septic system and it turns out it is. So I can understand why they didn't want to create extra risk there. So if the purchaser elects a septic inspection, the following provision will apply. Purchaser will obtain a septic inspection by a licensed or accredited septic inspector, on-site sewage system operator, on-site sewage system installer, or on-site soil evaluator at purchaser's sole expense within the inspection deadline. The seller will remove any landscaping, personal property, or improvement that impedes the septic inspection. Seller's delay in removing any such impediments and providing access to the septic system will result in an automatic extension of the inspection deadline for the purpose of conducting the septic inspection for a time equaling the time of seller's delay in complying and giving purchaser notice of such compliance. I want to point out a couple of points there. So if the septic inspector arrives and there is a jungle gym on top of the drain field, and the septic inspector says, well, I'm gonna have to come back, but that jungle gym has to be moved. The inspection deadline is automatically extended, but only for the purpose of the septic inspection. It is not like the above 7-day extension when you have formally asked for it. So it is only an extension. So you better get the rest of your inspections done by the inspection deadline, because your extension afforded to you in this clause only applies to the septic inspection, okay? Maybe the above ground pool is sitting on the septic tank. Maybe there is a concrete patio over the septic tank. This is not unheard of. It's not good. And I think at that point, when the seller says, I am not removing the concrete patio, we go into renegotiations at that point. So PJ's asking, shouldn't it state in front of inspection, reiterate septic? I'm not sure which
fourth line.
The fourth line.
Yeah.
The extension of the inspection deadline.
Yeah, it would be septic, because somebody could go and say, well, even though it starts out, purchaser will obtain a septic. My opinion is that it would say it says septic inspection third line should still reiterate the fourth line, just to CYA.
Well, I think the second half of that sentence says for the purpose of conducting the septic inspection. Is that the same section you're looking at?
The seller's delay in removing any such implications of providing access to septics and result in an automatic extension of the inspection deadline. I was just being usually over detailed.
That's okay. I would assume they figure they have covered that.
But that's assuming, and
right, for the purpose. Well, and I think there is no such thing as septic inspection deadline. There is inspection deadline, but I think
But then if it's just plain inspection, that somebody could throw in that's any inspection. Just trying to be legal.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. I understand what you're saying. And I'm sure someone will try to use that as a toehold at some point. We all know that will happen. So certainly I don't mind bringing that up to them and see what they think about. I mean, maybe they've already run that through the group and decided not to look at that. I'm glad they added for the purpose of conducting the septic inspection, because I'm just teaching it to y'all the way I am interpreting it. But I think the expectation there is, if there is a delay from the seller, then there is an automatic extension, but only for the septic inspection. So please function under that assumption. So the last sentence there says, purchaser will be liable for any damage to the property caused as a result of the septic inspection. In the event the contract is terminated, such obligation will survive termination as to any damage on the property. Meaning, even if you terminate the contract, the buyer is still responsible for reseeding the lawn, for putting the landscaping back, okay? So we're gonna check boxes below to say what sort of septic inspection, to what level are we going to be inspecting this septic system? Okay, all right. B, resolution of inspection issues. So this is the clause that you will be most familiar with, because it is very, very similar to how we have been doing it, currently or previously. So what it says is resolution of inspection issues. No later than the end of the inspection deadline, or as it may have been extended, purchaser will deliver to seller, listing agent, and selling agent a complete copy of each inspection report, including septic inspection if applicable, dealing with the requested repair, together with a repair addendum to the contract, setting forth purchaser's requested repairs, which will be called the repair addendum. Now, let's dissect that, because I already see a problem. If I'm having my home inspection done on the 10th business day, and I'm allowed 10 business days, I'm not going to have that report until the 11th business day, and that is already too late to turn it in. So it's saying not later than the end of the inspection deadline or as it may have been extended, am I going to turn in all reports. So please schedule your inspections up front. Don't drag it out. Don't wait until the last minute. Okay. I don't know how they're prepared to handle when a home inspector maybe has a delay in filing the report and we bump over our 10th business day. I don't know what that's going to look like. Home inspectors are quite prompt with providing reports, but I don't know what is going to happen if somebody has it done on the 10th business day and they get the report on the 11th business day. I don't know what that's going to end up. I don't know what's going to end up happening. So just please try to have it all done up front. We're going to have a new form, and that new form is called the repair addendum. And with the repair addendum, it's going to reiterate what are the actual material defects that can be asked for. What constitutes a material defect? And so we are going to be writing up a list of repairs that we are expecting the seller to make in order to address the material defects that have been discovered. So I'm going to read you the next section. Purchaser acknowledges the repair addendum shall not include cosmetic items or matters of preference, grandfathered features or systems that are properly functioning, but which would not comply with current building codes if installed or constructed today. And features or systems that are properly functioning, but near, at, or beyond their normal useful life. If purchaser makes timely delivery of the repair addendum and copies of all required inspection reports, then the parties will have blank business days. And if that's blank, it's 3. Do not leave any blanks, people. Put 3 in there, even if it is 3, okay? Because we have seen it come back where somebody has slipped in a new number in there because it was blank. Don't let that happen. Put something in the blank. The parties will have 3 business days after purchaser's delivery to negotiate a mutually agreeable repair addendum. Now, I am always going to be putting 5 business days in there, and I'll tell you why. When I am the listing agent and I receive a repair addendum, I am never going to have my seller agree to repairs that we have not had estimated yet. Now, if I get the repair addendum and it's tighten the toilet to the floor, correct one double tap in the electrical panel box, yes, we're going to sign that. But that's not what I ever get. I get a long list as the listing agent of repairs that need to be made. I have no idea, and my seller has no idea how much that's going to cost. So I am never going to have my seller sign one of those before we've had a contractor look at the list or come out and visit the property and give us an estimate. Additionally, even if my seller is going to turn down making the repairs or only going to make half of the repairs, or for whatever reason, my seller has decided not to complete the entire list of repairs, I want to be able to hand my bad news to the buyer's agent with an estimate showing what it's going to cost. Because additionally, the buyer has no idea how much it's going to cost to fix that repair list. And when people don't know, in my opinion, they over or underestimate what it's going to be. And I would rather them have actual knowledge about the ballpark price of fixing those repairs. So I'm always going to put 5 business days. And it goes on to say, during negotiations of such repair addendum, the parties may make, alter, extend, or withdraw offers and counteroffers as they each believe appropriate in an effort to reach agreement. Rejection by one party of an offer by another will not of itself terminate the negotiation process because it must go on for that full number of days. The parties will continue the process of negotiation until either the parties mutually agree on and execute the repair addendum, setting out the agreed resolution, or the parties cannot agree on the repair addendum. If no agreement is reached by the end of the negotiation period, purchaser, only the purchaser, will have 2 business days thereafter to terminate this contract. Failure of purchaser to terminate within such time will constitute purchaser's acceptance of the property, and the contingencies related to inspections will be deemed satisfied, waived, and removed, and this contract will remain in full force and effect. I want you as a buyer's agent to have terror in your heart right now, because the terror in your heart needs to be, you are responsible as the buyer's agent to make sure the buyer exercises their 2 business day termination right if you guys have not been able to come to a meeting of the minds on the repairs. It is not the buyer's job to know that they only have a 2 business day window of time to terminate this contract if we cannot come to a meeting of the minds on the repairs. It is the buyer's agent's job to know that. Put a reminder in your Google Calendar. Put a reminder in your Apple Calendar as to when the negotiation period is going to end. Put an alarm on that notification for yourself that the negotiation business days is going to end on Tuesday, and then put another alarm in your calendar for Thursday that is the last available opportunity for your buyer to terminate that contract if there has not been a meeting of the minds in negotiations. I promise you, the listing agent is not going to remind you. So if y'all come to the end of your negotiation period and the listing agent and the buyer's agent have stopped communicating at that point, we finished negotiating and the buyer does not terminate, the buyer is accepting the property in as is condition. PJ had her hand raised. Yes, PJ.
You pretty much answered it. I was just trying to go over that because most of the time I was doing 3, but then that makes sense on some, depending on your situation, but 5. So either way though, if they've come to terms, but then they've come to terms and it's signed, they still don't have that full 5 days if that's a 3rd day. So if it's agreed upon, that's settled, but they still have 2 days after that?
No,
Okay.
No, you only have 2 business days to terminate if the negotiation period expires.
Okay.
And there has been no agreed upon repair addendum.
So that's just basically giving 2 days to the buyer's side, extra days, basically.
No.
No.
This is giving the buyer a termination right if everybody has tried and no one can agree to a repair addendum. So like our previous contract, you could go on forever trying to negotiate an ROC.
Mm-hmm.
Now, instead of forever, it is ever how many days you've put in this business days slot.
Okay.
So there is a finite date as to when negotiations end.
Okay.
And negotiations end. Now they could keep going, but after 2 days after the expiration of this, the buyer then will have waived their right to terminate. Gotcha. So the only opportunity to end the negotiations is come to a meeting of the minds on the repair addendum, or buyer terminates during the 2 business days following the expiration of the negotiation period.
Okay. No dilly-dally.
That's the only way. And I hope that this termination right in here is going to motivate the seller and the buyer to come to a meeting of the minds. Or if they can't, the worst case scenario for the seller is going to be that the house is off the market during the inspection period, during the negotiation period, and then at the end of the negotiation period, either the buyer's buying it as is or the buyer's terminating, and then that house is going back on the market. Okay, the last bit here says, if no, in the event this contract is terminated, the parties will enter into a mutual release and the deposit will be refunded in full to purchaser in accordance with the provisions of paragraph 11A above. So now the inspection process is very similar, the negotiation process for repairs is very similar to the way we had it, except that there is an end. There is an end to the negotiations and the buyer has a termination right if there is no meeting of the minds. Okay. Now let's go on to the mind-blowing one. 14C. purchaser option. Again, remember, this is negotiable. The seller for the last year and a half is going to say no to this. But we get into another type of market and the seller's house has been on the market for 90 days and they get a buyer. The buyer says, yeah, but I want to have a look and then decide if I still want to buy it. The seller may agree to this. So what 14C says is this paragraph is or is not applicable. If no box is checked, the paragraph is not applicable. If this paragraph is applicable and purchaser is dissatisfied with their inspection results of the property, then in lieu of submitting a repair addendum to the seller, purchaser may instead terminate this contract by written notice to seller prior to the inspection deadline, or as it may have been extended, including written evidence of inspections performed. Provided, however, if purchaser submits a repair addendum to the seller, then purchaser waives their right to terminate this contract pursuant to this paragraph and agrees to proceed with the negotiation of the repair addendum as set forth above. Let me just tell you what this means. Buyer is going to have their inspections and within the inspection, before the inspection deadline, the buyer may terminate for, in my opinion, any reason whatsoever, so long as they have paid for an inspection. So it's asking for written evidence of inspections performed. I would interpret that to be a receipt for an inspection. So if I am representing the buyer and the buyer, I am going to schedule that home inspection first and foremost, unless there is a big ticket item that we're nervous about. Maybe there's a foundation wall that looks a little wonky. Maybe the HVAC, when we were there, wouldn't even turn on. So maybe the buyer has said to me, listen, I want that HVAC inspection first, because if that thing is at or beyond its useful life, I'm going to want to terminate. So maybe we just pay to have an HVAC inspector come out and do a full inspection of the property. And maybe the HVAC inspector says, you know what? This unit is undersized because they put an addition on the back of the house and they didn't size up the unit. So it's my opinion, you're going to need a second unit in here. The buyer could use this clause to say, I'm out. I don't want to buy this house. So the buyer's agent would be compelled by this paragraph to provide a receipt for the inspection performed and a termination form and a release. And then the last sentence here says, if purchaser terminates this contract in accordance with this paragraph, the deposit will be refunded in full to the purchaser in accordance with the provisions of paragraph 11A above. Upon request by seller, purchaser will provide entire copies of any inspection reports. So you are not, as the buyer's agent, sending reports to this seller unless requested, if you're using this paragraph. Now, let's walk this a couple of different ways. I'm the buyer's agent. My buyer has the home inspection on day 2 of the inspection period. They come out of the home inspection and they go, Ashley, I don't know. That's a lot of little things we didn't know about. The roof is, going to need to be replaced in a few years. I think we're changing our mind. Okay. Then as a buyer's agent, I'm going to explain to them, well, you have a right to terminate, or you can ask the seller to repair some things. And if the buyer goes, it's just the roof that bothers us. Do you think they'll give us a new roof? As you notice, there is no repair remediation limit for inspections. So me, the buyer's agent, and my buyer are going to have to make a decision. Are we just going to go ahead and terminate with clause 14C and go find another house? Or am I going to write up a repair addendum asking the seller to fix the leaks in the roof? Or even, and I would not ask for a new roof because that is not something they are allowed to ask for. So if the buyer discovers that the roof is just beyond its useful life, but it isn't leaking, I'm going to advise them to terminate, because the seller is not compelled to give them a new roof if it's not leaking. So instead, I'm going to say to the buyer, I think we need to terminate. And then if you want to come back in and we make another offer and we renegotiate this for a lesser price because of the roof being old, we can do that. And I could still verbally have a conversation with the listing agent about that. Hey, we're real squirrely because the roof, we're concerned about the roof. I don't want to tell you what we're concerned about the roof. However, would you find out from your seller if they're willing to do any sort of negotiating? Call me because we're going to have to walk through this and decide what's going to be the best option for your buyer. The safest option is now your buyer can terminate. They can terminate with 14C, receive a full refund of their earnest money deposit, and the buyer's agent is just going to deliver that home inspection receipt, the receipt that the home inspection was paid for, and then file a termination form and a release form. And then the buyer's out. Now, if the buyer says, well, there were some items, we're willing to see if the seller will repair them, they must be actual material defects. So you're going to write up the material defects on the repair addendum, and then 14C goes away. The buyer no longer has a termination right in relation to 14C. You've now opted to go down 14B and ask for repairs and enter into that negotiation period. Now the buyer can still terminate if the seller doesn't agree to all of those items. And there was one nuance in 14B I want to back up to. In 14B, it talks about the buyer's agent having to give a complete copy of each inspection report, including septic inspection, if applicable, dealing with the requested repair. Meaning, if the termite came back clean, you don't have to send them the termite inspection. I'm probably gonna, because that is way too high level critical thinking for me with each transaction to be like, okay, which ones am I sending, not sending? No harm, no foul if I send them a clean termite inspection as the buyer's agent, because I'm all about the processes, y'all. I'm all about I have sent the inspection reports. Here they are. Okay. But you're not contractually obligated to provide reports that you aren't asking for a repair for in 14B. I'm probably still going to do it anyway, but just letting you know about that nuance there. So
can you jump over,
please,
real quick? Can you jump over and answer Carla? That's been on there for a little bit. She wants to know if the seller needs to extend time to get quotes and they need more than the 5 days. Do we do an amendment to the change to change the number of days? Like,
yes.
How do you handle that?
Yes, you would do an amendment of contract of purchase stating that the seller and the purchaser agree to extend the negotiation period in 14B of the purchase agreement by 2 extra business days, something like that. Yep, absolutely. All right, there are a couple other changes on here I want to get to. 14D says that if purchaser fails to make timely delivery of the repair addendum or termination prior to the inspection deadline, as it may have been extended, then the contingencies related to inspections will be deemed satisfied, waived, and removed, and this contract will remain in full force and effect. Buyer, you cannot put your head in the sand. We have to make some sort of movement if we're going to terminate. Otherwise, you're buying this house as is with absolutely no repairs made by the seller. Okay. 15, inflow and infiltration inspection. That is a standalone clause because it is a required seller inspection required by the Western Virginia Water Authority if the home is serviced for sewer with the Western Virginia Water Authority. Now, I want you to look down at 17. 17 still exists and it is still a sellers and purchasers options. I had hoped this would be a different number in the contract because we're so trained that 17 has to do with repairs. It does, but it does not have to do with any repairs in regards to inspections, except it's going to deal with 16A, which is walkthrough and title. So 17, you now put in a repair remediation amount there, a remediation limit, but it will only apply to title, clear title, and walkthrough discoveries. There is no remediation limit that we put into this contract now in regards to inspections, okay? Now, back up to inflow and infiltration inspection, there's no remediation limit on that one either. It just says, if there is a problem that the Western Virginia Water Authority says needs to be fixed, the seller will fix it. And if the seller refuses, the buyer will have 2 business days to terminate. Okay. And then 16 is the walkthrough language that we're used to. Yes, Jennifer.
Can I back up to the inflow and infiltration for just a moment? The question yesterday was they were trying to do a strictly as is contract.
Yes.
Okay. The buyer is familiar with inflow and infiltration. The report or the letter just expired. So it just went out of the 5-year window. So the agent was asking, can we put that it's not contingent? And then can I order the inflow and infiltration myself?
Who? The buyer's agent?
The buyer's agent. So
I would say no, because you
this paragraph says the seller needs to order it.
Correct.
But he's trying to make it look as clean as possible as an as-is inspection, even though this is a free inspection. What would you have him mark? That it is contingent? Because then it is contingent on some inspections, but it's just this inspection.
So what I would say is, I would say just spell it out. If in the additional terms section you want to write, seller and buyer agree that the buyer may order the inflow and infiltration inspection prior to closing.
Okay.
And
that's what we talked about yesterday.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure that kind of was addressed, because if they don't do it, then the buyer later is going to receive a nice little letter and say, hey, you didn't do this inspection, correct?
Correct. The Western Virginia Water Authority is going to come knocking. So I mean, you do still have the option here in 15 to say it is or is not contingent upon the purchaser receiving it. So the purchaser can, in order to be competitive, they can say not contingent, whatever. We'll handle whatever comes our way with the Western Virginia Water Authority inspection. Right? And I've had one that I know is going to come up later. Buyer was okay with that. Buyer was saying, listen, we know we're going to get a love letter from West Virginia Water Authority because they're going to see that the property sold. And right. We know that sump pump is probably going to have to be routed out into the yard rather than into the sewer line. And we will, as buyers, pay to have that done later.
So I think his main thing was, I don't want to make it contingent upon this, but I still want it done. Like if there's any repairs that need to be made, we as buyers will handle that on our end. I think that's why he was confused about the
language. And they want it done prior to closing, is what you're saying?
Because it's required to be done. That was his thought. Like, I'm not going to make it contingent on it being okay because we'll fix it, but we still need that report.
I think you need to
spell out. Where he was muddied up.
I think you need to spell out in the additional terms what your intentions are. Are you going to have it done prior to closing? And if you are, what happens when there is a repair? Yep. Okay, so walkthrough language in 16A, that's where it's talking about how you're going to be able to have a walkthrough. You're going to be able to go, it's called a pre-occupancy or pre-settlement verification. And they changed that name from that word from inspection to verification. This is not an additional time to come in and have a reinspect. Okay, this is a time to come in and make sure the agreed upon repairs have been completed and that there is no new material damage or changes necessitating repairs. So what this is looking for is, did the mover put a giant hole in the wall? Okay, did the moving truck, back into the garage door and dent the garage door? What has happened since we went under contract that now the seller may be liable for? They're only going to be liable, the seller, to the remediation limit in 17. So if the moving truck backed into the garage door and now the garage door isn't opening, the buyer may ask the seller to remedy that, but the seller is only obligated to the remediation limit in 17. Okay. So we're going to look at what else has changed. We're going to go down to D. I want to look at the last paragraph in 15D. Sellers delay in complying with the provisions of this subparagraph D will result in an automatic extension for a time equaling the time of seller's delay in complying and giving purchaser notice of such compliance for purchaser to complete any inspection or verification affected by such delay. Meaning, we show up for the walkthrough and all of the utilities are off. And the buyer can now not verify that the property is still in the same condition it was in, minus normal wear and tear. That would constitute a delay. The seller has to keep utilities on, has to keep everything functional so that there can be a pre-settlement or pre-occupancy verification. And if not, and the seller has turned off utilities early, turned off the gas early, then there will be an extension automatically granted equal to the delay. Okay? All right. Everything else on here is still going to look really familiar to you. Let's see if anybody has any questions so far. Okay. I encourage y'all to get used to this new purchase agreement. This is what we have now, y'all. Okay. We're going to be trying it out for the next couple of months and just see where we stub our toe. I fully expect lots of phone calls from y'all. So please make sure you're calling me and going over some of this.